Hello, good evening everyone. My name is Vivek and I will be moderating the event today. On behalf of the PMI UAE chapter, I would like to welcome you all to the third webinar for 2020. I hope all of you are staying safe and following the guidelines issued by your respective governments. Let me give a quick introduction of today's speaker. His name is Shom Bag. He'll be talking about MENA on the threshold of e-commerce greatness, facts beyond the hype. A little bit background about him. He is a strategic marketing head in Fortune 100 MNC diversified technology companies such as 3M and Black & Decker. He is experienced in Europe, Middle East, Asia Pacific, specializing in strategic leadership, marketing, product project management, e-commerce strategy and deployment. He has over 10 years of experience in digital demand generation technologies, SEO, PPC, paid social and marketing automation, Google Analytics, Amazon PPC, and Amazon Programmatic. Before we begin, just some ground rules for the webinar. All attendees will be muted upon entry and remain that way. All questions will be addressed at the end of the webinar. There will be many polls during the webinar, so pay attention and stay engaged. Please use the chat for all technical issues. And this webinar will carry one PDU for everyone who stays engaged for a minimum of 60 minutes. I will now hand over to Shom. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivek, for the introduction, and good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and wish you all happy Earth Hour. So I hope you all are staying safe, practicing social distancing, and wearing your PPE. Basically Google, Bain, Forrester, they have provided high impact data that has helped me in producing this particular presentation. So you're gonna appreciate it in time to come. So it's really good that you all are here, and thank you for your time. So we're going to run basically polling, as Vivek mentioned, and please stay engaged and respond to the polls here. The retail industry in the Middle East and North Africa is on the threshold of a paradigm, a pivotal shift in the last 3 years, as you have seen. The e-commerce is becoming a reality, reinventing customers' purchase journeys, forming compelling customer experiences, disrupting the business models, the incumbent business models, and creating exponential growth opportunities for retailers as well as e-commerce pure players. I can see your response. I see that in the fiscal year 2019, quite a few of you, 15 of you have, 33, almost close to 50% have made more than 12 transactions, which is very, very encouraging. And that clearly shows that that the online is becoming a mode of choice for the consumers in the Middle East. So let's move on. So moving on to the agenda, so we have a structured agenda where we'll set the scene, what's been happening in the Middle East, global benchmark and regional deep dive, online user habits and buyer persona, category-wise trends, the high volume categories, we're going to delve into those, for example, electronics, fashion, beauty, etc. Strategies of the local retailers, how they are actually combating the pure players like Amazon, Noon, etc., as well as the cross-border players, who have come into the Middle East, and many of you must be already shopping with the likes of Net-a-Porter, Jolly Chick, etc. Importance of project management skills in e-commerce. So people who are actually working for the e-commerce companies in project management, that's a very, very important role given the sort of growth that we're seeing in the region. Then we're going to move into certain technical stuff, into customer acquisition and conversion inside Amazon particularly. We're going to talk about the future projections and key challenges, especially with the focus. And we're going to speak about demand and supply gap. We're going to speak about the payment issues. We're going to speak about the logistics and so on, with a particular focus on logistics because that's a major hurdle in the Middle East area. Then we're going to talk about the legal and policy perspective in brief, and then we're going to conclude with future e-commerce trends in 2020. So e-commerce is the engine of global retail growth. In 2017, for instance, the e-commerce industry came to the fore with 10% of all global retail sales. Today, e-commerce is a 2.2 trillion market and is expanding at an annual growth rate of 24%, which is 4 times faster than the global retail sector as a whole. So what we see as of 2020, the contribution of e-commerce to retail will be as high as 50%. And given the current scenario where most of us are homebound, we will tend to transact more and more online. So an online could actually be pulling us out of this recession that we have actually got into officially yesterday. So that's an important perspective, yeah, to consider given the rise of e-commerce, particularly in the Middle East. Now, as you know, MENA's journey has been a little different from other regions when it comes to the digital technologies. Because MENA, the first adoption of digital technologies came in mid 2000s with a faster internet, with with the smartphone, etc. But what we see is that the business did not follow suit, unlike other regions. So the business actually, the e-commerce as such, did not come along with this particular digital adoption. So we call that a consumer phase. And then around 2010, 2012 came the media phase when people started investing in the media. So I see the poll results, which is your favorite e-commerce pure play portal in the Middle East. And I see that clearly it's Amazon is a hands down winner with 23 out of 34 people choosing Amazon. Soon after that is Noon, 9 out of 34. And then Namshi. Namshi, of course, is fashion. Is a vertical e-commerce portal, so that's popular too with people who are into fashion, but clearly Amazon is a winner. So going back to the e-commerce situation, so e-commerce, the digital wave in Middle East has been a bit different from the other regions. So around 2010 and 2012, we started seeing a significant investment in the media as such. And then the e-commerce phase truly came in here, even though Souq was already existing, it truly came in here with the acquisition of Souq.com by Amazon in 2017. And then soon after that, we saw Noon with Mr. Alabar launching Noon with $1 billion investment backed up by Saudi sovereign funds. So really exciting times. So a very relevant slide, in my opinion, how coronavirus is impacting e-commerce. So as I said, as more and more, most of us are homebound and people are avoiding crowded public places and their restrictions, they're increasingly turning on to online shopping for the essentials. So Jerry.com, China's largest online retailer, has seen sales of common household quadruple over the same time period last year. So with the growth of e-commerce, what we see is that coronavirus shouldn't disrupt our economy as much as SARS outbreak did in 2002, when the e-commerce infrastructure was not even existing in most places in the emerging market. However, it will still bring strain to the online-based businesses who need to deal with the potentially delayed deliveries, out-of-stock items because of the increased demand. And we are seeing that in many places. The grocery portals have stopped delivering in many countries because of the high demand. So that's going to be the teething problem I see. But I personally feel that in this dark hour, e-commerce is a bright light, and it's going to help us significantly in coming out of the situation. So here's a quick research with the US retailers and their perspective. And as you can see that it's a mixed bag. It's up significantly 8%, up somewhat 30%, as projected 26%, down somewhat 32%, down significantly a tad around 4%. So it's a mixed bag of response from the US retailers and e-tailers with their perspective on the current situation. So now we'll delve straight into the e-commerce data and the scenario of the Middle East market, where you can see that in 2019, the fiscal 2019, we ended up with $13.7 billion transaction in the Middle East and North Africa region. And if you look at the charts carefully, as you can see from 2014 through 2017, we have had a compounded annual growth rate of 25%. Of course, on a low base of $4.2 billion, but it's significant given that e-commerce is fairly new to this particular region. And as you can see that Saudi, UAE, and Egypt is more than 50%, much more than almost 60% of the transaction in MENA. And these are the major markets. And one of the reasons why they are major is because the erstwhile Souk.com had 3 hubs, which was essentially UAE, Saudi, and Egypt. And because of that, the consumer response has been such. This is an important slide, in my opinion, as you can see that. So let's look at the slide and let's see how we can read it. So on the left-hand side, you've got the developed markets. In the middle, you've got emerging moderate growth markets. And then you've got emerging high growth markets. And then we have got our markets here, MENA as a whole, GCC, UAE, Saudi, and Egypt. So this particular chart essentially tells us the e-commerce penetration as a complete part of the retail. So for example, in UK, $15.6 out of $100 is through e-commerce. In US, it's 12.3, and in France, it's $10. Compare that with the emerging moderate growth, which is in Russia, it's 4.8, Brazil, it's 4.3, in Turkey, it's 4.2. As you can see in the emerging high growth market, which is China, India, and Indonesia, China obviously is leading with 13.8. And if you consider China's C2C markets, it's about 23%. India is at 2.4%, Indonesia at 2.3%, and you can see the Middle East markets are really low. For example, the entire MENA, the e-commerce penetration is just about that under 2%. So, which only means that there is a massive room for growth as e-commerce penetration in the Middle East remains fairly low compared to other regions of the world. Now we'll look into certain online habits of the consumers in the MENA. So the MENA consumer, and notably the GCC consumer, is among the most connected and digitally savvy in the world. The UAE and the KSA has some of the highest levels of internet and smartphone social media penetrations globally, as you can see in this particular chart, while Egypt has one of the highest levels of time spent online. As you can see, they spend on average 8 hours and 10 minutes. The internet plays a crucial role in consumer path to purchase, discovery, research, and actual purchase. So regardless of whether they shop online or in store, the consumers in the region are heavily influenced by their online activities. The internet plays a major role during the discovery process for both online and in-store buyers, with around 48% of UAE and Saudi consumers getting their shopping ideas and inspiration online. And this is nearly double of what we see in UK. The role of search engine in the search process is also instrumental. Around 56% of consumers in UAE, KSA, Egypt start their online shopping journeys using the search engines as opposed to the retailers' websites. Another important perspective is that the role of video in consumer path to purchase in the region is also important, reflecting the overall prominence of online video in digital life of MENA internet users. So in UAE and KSA, 20% of consumers watch online videos when researching products and services versus 7% in UK. And based on the research conducted with women in Saudi, YouTube introduced 50% of shoppers to a new brand, and 70% of shoppers follow brands that are interested in on YouTube. So as a result, in two shopper visits in a retailer physical stores or e-commerce channel after watching a YouTube video. So YouTube is critical for, I would say, for any brand that is trying to penetrate the e-commerce market, especially in the GCC. So this is an important chart in my opinion. And as I can see, and also I would like to mention that the Etisalat 5G infrastructure will also be a major enabler. And also as other telecom companies with the STC in Saudi, Kuwait, and Qatar, they start launching their 5G services, this is going to be a major enabler for the e-commerce in the region, in my opinion. Right. So now we're going to delve a little bit on the persona of the local Arab shopper. It's important to understand the consumer psyche before we actually discuss the e-commerce, as such. So the shoppers are exposed to a wide range of retail experiences in the Middle East. Constant innovation, changing and upgrading happens over here in the Middle East. And as you know, the offline retail is very, very developed with fantastic world-class malls that are providing brilliant experiences for all the world. Large international brands are already established here. Shopper engagement ranges across all product categories. And then shopping and retail consumption is an intrinsic part of the social life in all over Middle East. It allows for social integration, basically bonding, addressing their needs for collective, etc. And it's socially accepted arena for expression of self among the local Arabs. So in terms of the retail exposure, the shopper is very, very well developed, very well traveled, and they are actively seeking experiential products and gratifications, moving well beyond the brand value codes. So this is in short, summing up the mind or the persona of the Middle Eastern shoppers. Moving on to an important chart which talks about how we shop, and as you can see, the shopping patterns in the Middle East, the source that we have got from the data that we have got from Google clearly tells us that people are shopping in three main timelines, essentially during the Ramadan and Eid, during the mobile launches, during GITEX, and the White Friday. For people who are not familiar with White Friday, it's equivalent to Black Friday of the West. And so people are mainly shopping in these three areas. So shopping is fairly infrequent online, and it only shows that Middle Eastern customers haven't really truly yet integrated the online shopping as a part of their shopping habit. And as you can see, it also gives you by category. As you can see, electronics, beauty, and fashion, and you can see that they are, how they are moving across this particular curve in these three different windows: Ramadan and Eid, the mobile launches, and the White Friday. So that gives us a perspective that it's still very infrequent. And if you compare it with markets like US, a shopper in the US on an average would shop about 19 times in a year, as compared to about 3 to 4 times in UAE, 2 to 3 times in Saudi, and 1 to 2 times in Egypt. So the purchasing frequency, on the online e-commerce portals are fairly infrequent. And one of the reasons for that is the fact that there is a demand and supply imbalance. And we're going to talk about it at length a little later. It basically means that the choice of the products are fairly limited still, and it's increasing with Amazon coming in. But this has also led to advent of a lot of cross-border players who are actually targeting the Middle East customers, because the Middle East portals are not really having that kind of product portfolios to attract that many customers. So that's an important point. So here is one of my favorite charts. This is benchmarking the online spending habits. So you see on the left, you've got the percentage of internet users shopping online across UK, China, US, UAE, Saudi, and Egypt. So as you can see that the percentage of internet users online in UK is about 89, in UAE is about 63, in Saudi almost the same. The purchase frequency, though, is very different. So as you can see in the UK, as I was speaking about, it's about 18 times in a year. In China, is about 22 times in a year. 19 times in the US. But in the UAE, it's about 3 to 4, which is in line with what I showed you in the last slide, which is 3 main windows: the Eid, the mobile launches, and the White Friday. So people are still very picky and choosy about, they're probably researching online, but they're actually transacting only 3 to 4 times. So it's fairly infrequent in terms of their shopping frequency. So it's very similar in Saudi Arabia and Egypt. And in terms of spending basket, it's comparable to actually, what they have in the rest of the countries. So as you can see, it's around $150 in UAE and Saudi, which is comparable to the UK and what you have in the US. But the number of times that they're shopping is fairly less. On the right-hand column, it gives you the internet penetration. So one of the reasons why people are actually still shopping less is probably because offline retail infrastructure is very, very well developed in the Middle East. So once again, I'm getting the results of the survey, and I can see that 11 out of 33 people are in the shopping basket size is above $100, and 51 to $99 is about 10, which is almost the same percentage, and 7 people less than $50. So that's great insights, good to know that these data. And what I feel is that, people are researching online, but they actually, because of their consumer habits and years of inertia, they're still going to the malls and purchasing in the malls rather than buying online. And that probably will change this year with the restrictions that have been imposed with the COVID-19 situation. And we'll probably see, as a result of this particular forced restriction, the internet penetration and the e-commerce penetration will significantly increase from 4 to somewhere higher. So that is what I think is going to happen because of what we are experiencing right now. So moving on. So now we'll move on to the categories inside the e-commerce. So as you can see, the 4 major categories that we have in the Middle East that are high velocity are electronics, fashion, beauty and personal care, and grocery. So still the pick of the lot is the electronics, which is almost a $3 billion category. And then you've got a fashion 1.1, almost the same for the beauty. And the grocery is still in its infancy, and though it's growing very fast, as you can see, and it's going to grow even faster in the current situation. So it's growing to 62% on a very small base, and beauty and fashion are growing at 20% apiece. And as you can see that the electronics is growing at 23% compounded annual growth rate over like 3 years, 2014 to 2017. Which is very encouraging. And though the bases are very small and low as compared to the global averages, I still feel that these are going to remain like this for foreseeable future and probably going to increase, particularly in this year, given the situation that we are in. Now, on the right-hand side, you have the GCC and Egypt e-commerce penetration by categories. So as you can see, by 2022, electronics is going to be 47%. Excuse me. Fashion is going to be 20%, and beauty is going to be 9%, and so on. The grocery is going to be 3%. Sorry. So over here, we've got a category-wise projection again for GCC, Egypt, e-commerce market by category. So electronics, which is 2.9 billion in 2017, is going to be 6.4 billion. Fashion from 1.1 is going to be 5.7. Grocery from 0.2 will become 4.5. Beauty from 1 to 1.8. So at this time, we have a poll, and which is your most frequented category? It'd be great to have your perspective. And e-commerce penetration in GCC, as you can see, in electronics is going to shoot up from 16 to 25%, beauty from 11% to 14%, fashion from 2% to 9%, etc. Grocery will move from 1 to 4%. There's a significant amount of, let's look at the poll first. Let's look at the results from the poll. Right, so it's very much in line with what we have in terms of the market sizes. So 31 out of 43, their favorite and most frequented category is electronics. Fashion and grocery is almost the same. And beauty over here, probably we don't have that many women. It's 1 on 43 only. And this is almost in line with what we have here, barring the only thing that is flipped over is the beauty, probably in terms of the demographics of this particular community that is attending this session. We don't have that many women, but it's fairly representative of what we are seeing here. Right. So as I said sometime back, there is a demand and supply gap in the Middle East in terms of the portfolio itself. So that is being filled up by Amazon, eBay, AliExpress as a case in point. The global e-commerce players have been actively marketing to MENA consumers in general merchandise category. Popular global delivery services that we have in the Middle East, like Aromex's Shop and Ship, which offers MENA online shoppers a local delivery address in major cities around the world, has been a facilitator. The fashion category has been particularly favorable to cross-border e-commerce, with players such as Net-a-Porter, Faftech, ASOS actively targeting MENA consumers and offering fast and inexpensive shipping and return options. We've also seen that China-based players have significantly grown in high street fashion category by investing in local marketing strategies and customizing their business models with Arabic websites, local warehousing, fast shipping options, convenient return policies. In Saudi Arabia, for example, Chinese e-commerce players such as Jolly Chick and Shein have seen 60% annual growth over the past years, making them among the most popular e-commerce destination in the market. The regional retailers and e-commerce pure players have also taken notice of the demand-supply imbalance, and they're significantly ramping up the e-commerce opportunity for the customers in the region. And the region is starting to see a step change in the availability of the products online. So let's look at what the local retailers are up to. What are they doing? So as you can see in this particular slide, you've got all the key retailers. People who are in the Middle East are very well familiar with these names. So these are major local family brands, which are main retail distributors. So you've got Al Shaya, Al Tayer, Al Futtaim, Azadi, Apparel, Shalhoub, Landmark, and Majid Al Futtaim. So they have deployed essentially three strategies. The first one is launching an existing offline brand online. So, for example, Alshaya, which already is present offline, has clearly made that brand online, like H&M, Mothercare, Bath and Body Works, etc. Altair with Mamas and Papas, Al Futtaim with Ace Hardware, Toys R Us, Azadi with Zara and Virgin, Shalhoub with Lacoste, Swarovski, all the high-end premium brands that they have. Landmark Group with their Middle and Home Center, Centerpoint, Shoe Mart, Splash, Max, etc. And Majid Al Futtaim with Carrefour UAE. So these brands are existing as a brick and mortar, and from there they have made it online. So that's the first strategy, to compete with the pure players as well as with with the cross-border pure players. And then we have got the second strategy, which is launching a completely new brand online. So as you can see, Altair has got ONAS, NAS, and NISNAS, which are basically completely brand that only trade online. You won't find an offline. Apparel has got Sixth Street, which only trades online. And then the third strategy is to have some kind of strategic JV. So, for example, Landmark Group has tied up with Namshi, Shalhoub has tied up with Faftech, Azadi has tied up with Namshi, and so on. So essentially, this has been done to bridge that demand and supply imbalance, because the customers over here, as I mentioned, and as a brand person assured, they're well traveled, they have a very high recall of the top brands, so they want maximum choice. And those choices are clearly not yet there in the Middle East. Of course, with Amazon launch of Amazon global stores, it's coming in, but till that is fully deployed, we will continue to have we'll continue to see a significant amount of cross-border e-commerce companies marketing actively to the customers in the Middle East. So, if you see, and one more data I want to throw at you at this particular point in time is the fact that, Amazon global stores had almost 500 million SKUs at any particular point in time, as against that, Souk had only 8 million. So that again establishes the demand and supply imbalance and the choice issue that we have in the Middle East in terms of portfolio. And that is being addressed by these kind of strategies that have been deployed by local brick and mortar operators who are making their foray into e-commerce. Moving on. So in this particular slide, I tried to, pretty much trying to picture the landscape. So this is the fast fashion, and if you see the fast fashion landscape, you can see that the cross-border players, the pure players in the cross-borders are ASOS, Boohoo, Shopbop. In regional presence, you've got Noon, you've got Nisnas, you've got Namshi, and you've got Souk. And in omni-channel retailers, you've got Abercrombie and Fitch, and you've got regional presence with Centerpoint, Sun & Sand, Marks & Spencer, etc. So this is how the market has been split in terms of between the e-commerce pure players that are locally present, e-commerce pure players who are cross-border, omni-channel retailers that are cross-border, and omni-channel retailers that are locally present. That's how the market is split in terms of the e-commerce, yeah? In terms of luxury fashion, the last one we saw was the fast fashion. This is the luxury fashion. In luxury fashion, you can see that the key players, which are e-commerce pure players, cross borders, are very active in this. You've got Net-a-Porter, you've got Yoox, you've got Outnet, etc., that are strongly present in this particular market. In terms of regional presence, you've got the Luxury Closet, you've got Faftech. In omni-channel retailers, you've got Selfridges, you've got Bloomingdale's. And in terms of regional presence, you've got Level Shoes, you've got Buy Symphony, and you've got ONAS from Altair. So this is how the landscape looks when it comes to the luxury fashion. So I just want to put into perspective in terms of how people are trying to, make the maximum out of this issue of demand and supply imbalance, and try to provide more choice to the customers so that they actively embrace online shopping into their shopping habits. So the e-commerce pure players have won the first round in the Middle East, and the game is still on. So as of 2017, the e-commerce pure players control more than 90% of e-commerce market in the MENA, cementing their first mover advantage. In most emerging markets where the retail infrastructure is relatively underdeveloped, the e-commerce pure players have managed to capture the lion's share. The case of China is telling, actually. At the turn of the 21st century, in the space of 10 years, China's middle-class population increased by almost 200 million, creating a significant demand for retail products that historically, in a historically underdeveloped physical retail ecosystem, could not meet. So e-commerce came to the rescue. Alibaba's efforts to address the core e-commerce ecosystem challenges in areas such as product selection, payment, logistics paid off, and paving the way for e-commerce to scale quickly and address the growing customer demand. Alibaba and other e-commerce pure players also managed to capture the majority of the markets along the way. So a similar thing can happen in Middle East too. Now, given this kind of a boom in e-commerce, obviously there is a significant amount of jobs that have been created in project management in the region, and that's happening as we speak. If you look up the job market, if you look up LinkedIn, there are lots and lots of e-commerce project manager jobs that are cropping up. And so we're going to next discuss why the project management skills matter in the e-commerce. So as you can see, this is the typical e-commerce landscape where you have four major blocks of e-commerce. So you have the e-commerce infrastructure overview, where you have the software and the hardware components that are being used. And then you have got the payment gateway. Then you have the product and the customer acquisition, and then the logistics and the last mile team. The role of the project manager is critical in actually seamlessly, managing all the knowledge areas and process groups that I've mentioned here in no particular order, but one has to really work seamlessly, creating a very solid project management plan. And what I've seen in my experience, having especially at Black & Decker, is the fact that, the particular processes that are very, very in demand they're all in demand, but the ones that are critical, in my opinion, are developing a project charter for the ones of you who are familiar with the PMBOK, defining the scope, creating a work breakdown structure, estimating the activity durations, developing a schedule, estimating costs, but more importantly, planning communications and planning the risk management. Because e-commerce is an extremely risky venture. And the reason why I say that is because the product is in front of the customers 24/7. So it's very important to get it right the first time. That's why it's important to, plan the risk management, identify risks, perform qualitative and quantitative risk analysis, and plan the risk responses exactly in line with what we have studied in PMBOK. All those things actually come extremely handy when you actually deploy a project management in e-commerce. Another thing that is, that I've seen that is becoming very, very important in terms of a knowledge area is the perform integrated change control. And the reason why that is important is the fact that, it's what we're seeing essentially is that e-commerce industry is full of different kind of stakeholders, and then the changes are pretty rapid. So we are working in an environment where the changes are constantly happening. So how do we respond to those changes? Typically coming out of the execution and monitoring and control phases, it requires a change request. And how do we deal with the change request is basically through performing integrated change control. And we essentially study the impact analysis, then we do the decision making, then we go through an approval, reject, or deferral process, update the change logs, update the PM plan, and then we communicate that to all the stakeholders. So it's a typical PMBOK, perform integrated change control, which I've seen, it's being used very often in e-commerce project management. So that's something that I want to mention to you. What I've also seen in my experience lately in last 2 years is the fact that agile concept is becoming increasingly popular in e-commerce. So I know many of you know the concept of agile, but some of you use agile and Scrum interchangeably. So I just want to define it for a while. So agile is a set of methods and principles based on the values expressed in the Agile Manifesto, as you know, and things like collaboration, self-organization, cross-functionality of teams, etc., are important in agile. So it's a mindset, and as described by 4 values, defined by 12 principles, and then displayed using numerous frameworks, one of which is Scrum. So as you can see in this particular slide, the Agile is being implemented by the framework of Scrum. You can also deploy Agile using Kanban, using other frameworks that are available in the marketplace. So Scrum is particularly popular. As you know, it's a framework to deploy Agile. It's got 3 roles, it's got 3 artifacts, and it's got 3 ceremonies. So in terms of roles, it's got a product owner, it's got a Scrum master, it's got a Scrum team. In terms of the artifacts, it's got a product backlog, it's got a user, it's got a user backlog, it's got a user story, it's got a burn down chart. And in terms of ceremony, it's got sprint planning, it's got daily Scrum, it's got sprint review and retrospective. So essentially, Agile is the why and the Scrum is the how. So if Agile is a diet, Scrum is a recipe. So I just want to make that very clear. We got the results of the poll. As I can see that out of 34 participants, 28 of you haven't had experience in an e-commerce project, but 6 of you have had some kind of experience in e-commerce. So I can clearly see that we have got some people who have worked in e-commerce. And what I can do after this particular webinar is that I can give you a cheat sheet to most of you, defining the main deliverables of a project manager in e-commerce in terms of the roles and responsibilities, in terms of experience and skill sets. So that's going to be pretty handy if you're thinking of looking for a role in the e-commerce domain as a project manager. Moving on to the e-commerce itself, and now we're going to talk a little bit about about the e-commerce itself and the customer journeys. So as we know, this is a typical sales and marketing funnel, and from the awareness to consideration through the purchase, post-purchase, and repeat purchase. So the customers go through the funnel, and then the objective of the sales and marketing and the e-commerce companies is to make maximum conversion as much as possible. That's the moment of truth. But along the way, actually, take micro commitments from the customers while they go through the funnel and make the customer journey as enjoyable as possible. One of the things that we have noticed in the e-commerce is the fact the decision making are non-linear, which means that people have different touch points. They have got friends with a word of mouth, they've got TV adverts, social adverts, they've got in-store purchases, they've got online adverts. So all of these actually help in let them make up their mind and increase the conversion. So given this particular scenario, actually Amazon has got 2 different advertising options. The first one is the Amazon Ad Console. So Amazon Ad Console is essentially providing the customers product and brand ads, which are essentially used to boost the profile of the brands inside Amazon. Yeah. And the mode of payment of those are pretty much like Google. So it's like many of you who are familiar with the Google paid ads. These are like a PPC, so they're paid per click. As against that, if you want to explore beyond the capabilities of the Amazon Ad Console, you can look at the Amazon DSP or demand side platform, which is essentially telling you, basically giving you the opportunity of driving customers from outside Amazon ecosystem to Amazon and then create more conversions. And again, like the programmatic ecosystem, these ads are paid cost per thousand, or they are a bit like the Google display ads. So Google display ads, you pay per thousand or CPM, and the Google, the paid ads, the search ads, you pay per click. So it's very similar concept that we have for Amazon. And we see in coming days, the marketers using this more often. At this particular point in time, I want to mention something to you. In the last 2 to 3 years in the Middle East, there's been a significant change in the search behavior. We got the poll results. Have you ever sold anything on Amazon? And here I can see that, oh, we've got 15 out of 40 people who have an account and have sold on Amazon something. That's great to see. Good. Right. So coming back to my point, there's a significant change in the search behavior, and we see that folks are searching less and less in the search engines, which is Google, for relevant categories, and they're searching inside Amazon. As a result, the marketers are shifting their search dollars from Google to Amazon. So in some ways, Amazon is actually challenging the fundamental revenue models of Google, which is the search advertising and display advertising. And that's happening because people's search behaviors are shifting inside the e-commerce portals. Yeah, that's a very important point I want to mention here. So what can we expect from Amazon advertising? So you have the sponsored products, the sponsored brands, you've got the display ads, you've got video ads. So these are options that we have seen outside Amazon, but they're now available inside Amazon. We also have the Amazon stores, which allow the vendors and sellers to create their own website. And with its own branded URL on Amazon, vendors or sellers can use the store to showcase a brand story and product portfolio in a curated customer destination. And then, as I mentioned, you've got the Amazon DSP, which is a demand side platform that allows advertisers to programmatically, buy ads in terms of behavioral profile on Amazon sites and apps, as well as through Amazon's direct publisher relationships and third-party exchanges. What do we have in terms of Amazon Creative? So Amazon is making a concerted effort to empower the brands with creative tools and features that they need to establish their brand equity, promote the shopper loyalty. Amazon currently offers a multitude of branding features, including Amazon stores, A+ content, which is very important, which is basically the content to be conversational for the adverts and not being technical, premium A+ content, and enhanced brand content. So not only do these creative features help to improve the aesthetics of the brand on the marketplace, but they also provide new opportunities to drive traffic and increase the conversion, increase the stickiness of the consumers while they're shopping online. So probably worth exploring for those of you who are making their first foray into Amazon in 2020 and beyond. Right. So with the right fundamentals in place, I believe that Middle East and North Africa region, the e-commerce space is expected to grow up to 2 times its current size. So as I showed in the first chart, we are about 14 billion US dollars in the fiscal 2019. And what we see, what we actually estimate is that in 2022, this market size is going to be 28.5 billion US dollars. And from 2017, that's a 28% compounded annual growth rate. And along with that, as you can see, the biggest market is going to be obviously Saudi Arabia with 10 billion. UAE is going to be about 8.9 billion. Egypt is going to be about 5.2 billion, and so on. And as you can see, the internet penetration, the e-commerce penetration is going to grow significantly. So today we have got 4.2% UAE to 13% in 2022, Saudi Arabia 3.8 to 8%, GCC 3% to 12%, and overall MENA from about 2% to 7%. That's a significant growth in terms of the e-commerce penetration, which means that e-commerce will be a significant contributor to the retail in the region. So let's wait for a few seconds to get your responses. Have you subscribed to Amazon Prime? The answer is it's almost 40, 60, 40% have subscribed and are enjoying its benefits, and the rest of them are still probably thinking about it. So it's a great service. I think you should try to adopt it. Got great benefits. And we're going to see very soon, how Amazon Prime has actually improved the customer stickiness to Amazon in another country, in another region. So we're going to talk about here in this particular slide about the e-commerce penetration journey in two major markets. So in this particular slide, you're seeing that US and China. In US, it's about 12%. The current e-commerce penetration as a part of retail is about 12%. Whereas in China, it's about, I can't see, but it's about 14%. It's about 14%, right? So as you can see, the journey in US has been linear. The growth in US has been linear, whereas in China has been exponential. And one of the reasons I personally feel that in Middle East, initial days is going to be exponential because we are on a low base, but eventually it's going to taper down to a linear growth because, and one of the main reasons for that is that the offline infrastructure is very, very well developed. There's so many malls, world-class malls, offering very high standards of customer service, fantastic experiences, which all of us have experienced who have lived in Dubai and other cities in the Middle East. So that's the reason why e-commerce will be balanced by the retail market, but it's still going to grow significantly as we've seen in the last chart. One more reason is the policy-based reason, and that is, as you know, that billions of dollars of capex is currently engaged in the offline retail. So it's not going to shift overnight. That's why offline is still going to be, a good balance to the e-commerce in the Middle East. And I feel my prediction is that after 2022, the growth in e-commerce in the Middle East is going to be linear rather than exponential. So it's going to follow a curve similar to the US rather than China. Right. This is the entry of this is the impact of the entry of a large e-commerce player that can help accelerate a shift, as exemplified by Amazon's launch in India. So as you can see, Amazon actually entered India in 2013. Before that, in India, we had Flipkart famously, which has now been acquired by Walmart. But as you can see, that after the introduction of Amazon Prime, there's been a spike. And hence the question. That's the reason why I put the question, how many of you have actually subscribed to Amazon Prime? Because there are clear benefits, especially in terms of the fulfillment. So Amazon Prime is going to make a huge difference in terms of fulfillment. So India is a great case in point. As you can see that the Amazon Prime is a tipping point. This is the point where the business has actually shot up. So probably that's going to happen in Middle East as well. Right. So now we're going to talk about the challenges. What are the challenges? And then, obviously there are challenges, but I feel that the flip side of the challenges are the opportunities. So the first one is we have already touched upon is the product assortment. So limited access to a broad and a deep, portfolio that we have in the Middle East. So as I was mentioning, the region's largest e-commerce platform, Souk, offered an estimated 8.4 million SKUs, far fewer than 550 million offered by Amazon in the US. So this is a huge demand and supply side gap, especially when you are dealing with a very matured customer base. So that is going to change hopefully with the Amazon global stores that are being launched here in the Middle East. And then another second point is very typical of the region, and that is the cash on delivery. The cash on delivery has been one of the biggest challenges for the e-commerce in the region. COD leads to higher return rates, failed deliveries. It adds pressure to working capital for the e-commerce companies while limiting delivery options to logistic companies that accepts this form of payment. Today, around 62% of MENA online shoppers prefer, it's a staggering number, 62% of the MENA online shoppers prefer COD as a payment method when buying online, compared with less than 5% in UK and France. The COD is prevalent in UAE as well, and we've got the results, and it's a bit different. So as I can see over here is that you prefer, for all of you over here, you're preferring, a large majority of you are preferring to pay by credit card. And cash on delivery is a very small portion here. But that is not what the data is telling us about. So this particular sample is giving a different result. And I'm going to share the result with you, which is very staggering, in the next slide. So since we've got the poll results, let's hop on to the next slide and see what the data is telling us. Right, so this is an important slide, which is giving us, the credit card penetration and the COD preference. So at the bottom of the slide, you've got the credit card penetration of UK, which is 47%, and compare that with UAE, 56%. So UAE has got a full almost 10% more credit card penetration than UK. But in UK, the COD preference is only 4, as against a staggering 44%. This is a really huge difference. Similarly, in France, the credit card penetration is 51%, whereas COD is only 3%. In Saudi Arabia, the credit card penetration is 3%, whereas the COD is 57%. In Egypt is even more, 85%. And overall, MENA, the credit card penetration is not very high. It's still about 30%, but look at the COD numbers. It's 62%. And this is really adding on to the inefficiencies. And I was speaking to some of my friends who work for large e-commerce companies, and they said they're going to, approach this issue with a stick and a carrot approach. And they're going to create a switch in the buying behavior, and on the other hand, they're going to charge additional if somebody's going to opt for a COD option, which we're already seeing. If you have a COD order in Amazon, you're going to pay additional amount of money as against a credit card. So what Google has done is that they have run a survey on around 6,000 respondents to see why people do what they do, because it's a bit of an aberration in terms of holding credit cards, but paying through, expecting a cash COD order. So let's look at that particular survey of Google. So this particular survey actually is telling us about the reasons for the cash on delivery, the preference for COD in MENA. So as you can see, that 64% of the respondents are of sample size of 6295 have said that I only want to pay when I have the products in hand and not earlier. So this typically is telling us that some of these people are actually deploying their offline shopping inertia online. So they really still have to evolve and start paying by credit card if they have one. So this is the first response. Second one is it's easier to keep track of my expenses in cash. So this is a very cultural thing of the Asian and Arab mindset, and people want to keep a track of their cash and they're not comfortable paying by credit card, and that's a staggering 35%. I don't trust my credit card information. Information is stored safely, so the safety concerns 33%. Credit card is more expensive. Payment options 9%. And the fourth one is probably a privacy reason. I don't want to make other people aware of my purchases. That's about 8%. This is a very interesting slide that's telling us about the mindset of the customers. And obviously, with the large e-commerce players like Amazon coming in, they are obviously going to work on creating a switch in this particular behavior, because this is going to be a major impediment to the growth of e-commerce in the region. So let's now step back and look at the third impediment, which is the product delivery. The challenges related to the speed and cost of product delivery in MENA have hindered the development of e-commerce. In UAE and Saudi, the estimated average cost of package delivery is more than 3 times the global best practices for similar delivery times. With higher rates of returns and failed deliveries, almost 5 times the global best practice, COD-based deliveries are estimated to be twice as expensive as prepaid orders. So this is another major issue. And then, therefore, let's look into the logistics part or the fulfillment part. So this particular slide, we're going to talk about the regional logistic hurdles to e-commerce. The first one is the cost of delivery. More than 3 times the global best practice, rates of return and failed deliveries 5 times the global best practice. COD-based deliveries are estimated to be twice as expensive as prepaid orders. Second point is the weak last mile infrastructure, poor postal infrastructure. As you know, in the Middle East, we don't have very strong postal infrastructure, which happens to be the backbone in the Western countries for e-commerce. Most global courier companies like FedEx, DHL, UPS do not offer the COD service. Large regional multi-category e-commerce players have to build their own last mile delivery infrastructure. As you know, that over here, Souq.com created the Q Express, and that really helped them tide over this particular problem. And then we have a poor address system in the Middle East, so directly impacts the speed and failure rates. That's another thing that we have to deliver. And when you compare this against developed countries and even other countries like India and China and other countries, we have a fairly poor addressing system in the Middle East, which impacts the delivery and the failure rates. And the fourth one is the absence of a land customs clearance. As you know, in the Middle East, for the e-commerce, we do not have a land customs clearance, which means that the e-commerce companies will have to opt for an expensive air shipments to actually ship the product within these small countries. For example, from UAE to Kuwait or from Qatar to other countries. And then we have some embargo issues, especially with countries like Qatar. So those things are really having an impact as well on the cost. So these are a summary of the regional logistics hurdles to e-commerce. And then we just touch upon this briefly, not in detail, but there are legal considerations, and that is the online contracting, privacy laws. As you know, in Middle East, we've got draconian, laws when it comes to social media. So the companies will have to be very careful when it comes to their social media content and how they interact with the customers. They have to be careful of the local cultural issues and their promotion related issues, content, privacy, as well as technical matters, which have to be properly taken into account while setting up the contracts. So it's very important to have a strong legal eagle in your team while you're doing so. Right, so we will close with the 5 future e-commerce trends of 2020. In my opinion, personalization and customer engagement are the key. Compared to the traditional retail shopping, where the customers are already used to a very high standard of customer service, e-commerce lacks face-to-face and personal interaction. It's also a cultural thing. So they have to, clearly work on personalization and customer engagement. So the user experience and the customer experience will make a major difference, and that's going to be a thing that the e-commerce companies are going to work on in 2020. Artificial intelligence, assistants, and chatbots. In 2020, robots will invade the e-commerce stores. That's what we see. Another key trend is that the B2B e-commerce is going to be emerging in the region. That's what we feel is going to happen, because whatever is offline is going to mirror online. So it's very important that we see an emergence of the B2B e-commerce, and that's going to happen. Already we have a few companies that are providing the B2B e-commerce services, and we see that developing further in 2020. And then, I personally see the interactive product visualization. That's going to be another key trend in 2020. The last one is going to be, as what we spoke about, is going to be the investment in demand generation. The salespeople and the companies and the brands which are making the foray into e-commerce, probably for the first time, or even they have moved in before, and they really don't have a strategy, because most companies were using the e-commerce in the region for liquidation. Whenever they had a large inventory position, they would use the e-commerce to liquidate. But that's not the case now when you have to have a coherent strategy. And when you have to have a coherent strategy, you have to have a demand generation in place. And as I mentioned in the previous slides, which means that, and with the change in, in the search habits, the companies and the marketers will have to invest in the Amazon PPC, paid ads, as well as Amazon DSPs, the demand side platforms, to create a very strong pull inside the Amazon or other e-commerce platforms, if these are available in there, to actually hammer the conversions, because conversions, the competition is rising. We have entered into a recession, so if we have to really work on our conversion and beat our competitors, we have to make this investment. This is a necessary evil, right? So with that, we move on to the conclusion chapter. So as I mentioned, that the market is estimated to reach about around almost going to be about 30 billion US dollars, 28.5 billion US dollars as per Bain by 2022. The region's digitally obsessed consumers are hungry for a broader online product selection and new shopping and customer experiences. So e-commerce is at the core of the retailer strategies, and e-commerce pure players are expanding into new markets, as we have seen here with the acquisition of Amazon, with the birth of Noon, and the new markets and product categories. The different elements of the e-commerce ecosystem, namely the payments and logistics, have come a long way despite the remaining challenges that we just spoke about in the slide before. The opportunity is significant for consumers, businesses, investors, and ecosystem players. Exponential or linear, the pace of growth is most likely going to be exponential in the beginning, and then it's going to be linear in the Middle East. The pace of growth will depend on how fast the 3 Ps that we mentioned, which is the product selection, payments, and product delivery, come together. And as I mentioned, we've got the result of the survey. So what matters to you the most when you're transacting online? So it's a price. 25 out of 43, that's the pick of the lot. So people are looking bargain hunting, and which is probably the right consumer behavior in the current situation. And then the rest are almost the same. In terms of portfolio, it is probably the lowest. In terms of speed of delivery, the same. User experience, double of that. But certainly people are bargain hunting on the e-commerce. So clearly it is price that is the main lever. So I expect that most e-commerce players are going to throw excellent pricing, as you know, the markets are falling right now. So hopefully that will be addressed. The last point that I want to mention is that the project management skills are going to be absolutely indispensable for e-commerce success in MENA, and that's probably because this particular business is highly adaptive. It is prone to a lot of changes, and as a result of which you need very high caliber project management skills to deliver the goods within the scope, time, cost, and quality, as well as mitigate the risks. So it's important that we have a lot of specialized project managers who would develop to be even better in the e-commerce domain in the time to come. So that was the last slide from my side, and probably we'll open up the floor now for some Q&A if you have. Right, we have a question here. Can you hear me? I think you can hear me. Somebody is asking about the skills and the knowledge areas that are needed for project managers to be hired in this particular sector. So as I mentioned that, all the key knowledge areas and the process groups that are there in the PMBOK, one have to be particularly good at that. But the ones that are the pick of the lot in that is obviously the planning process group. So where you have to define the scope, create the work breakdown structures, estimate activity durations, develop schedule, estimate costs, determine budgets, estimate activity resources, plan communications, identify risks, perform qualitative and quantitative risk analysis, plan risk response, etc. These have to be particularly robust. In terms of monitoring and control, as I mentioned, the perform integrated change control is an important process. So one needs to be adept at that because you're dealing with different kind of stakeholders, and it's an adaptive environment. So it's important that you are adept at conducting a thorough PICC. Also, in terms of the agile work environment, as I mentioned, that we have to be good at deploying agile framework in an adaptive environment like e-commerce with different kind of stakeholders. So getting good at agile, learning the PMI ACP qualification is particularly critical, I would say. And also, if you can get a Scrum certification done from Scrum Alliance, that will be very good to deploy agile. So that's my point of view. I can see some other questions over here. What are the challenges of incorporating e-commerce with the overall supply chain and current situation of COVID-19? I'm currently in North America and we are not able to move easily. Right. So it's going to be a teething problem because, the e-commerce companies were not expecting, they were not bracing for this kind of demand. So suddenly people have got restrictions on movement. They're not able to go to their, regular places to shop, the essentials or the grocery, particularly grocery, because it's come down to the basics and the brass tacks. So they're not able to handle this kind of demand. The supply chains are not agile enough to handle this kind of demand. But I feel that with the passage of time, give it a month and a half, they're going to work on ramping up their, supply chain infrastructure, the last mile infrastructure, and it's going to smoothen. It's still going to be not absolutely to the T, but it's certainly going to improve with time. Yeah. Next question from Mr. Latif. What are the challenges you faced setting up payment gateways? Obviously, in my scope of work, obviously the payment gateway was being, supplied from a payment supplier. And it was pretty smooth. We didn't really feel any hassle. But what we really, focused on was the user experience. Because if you look at a key e-commerce, KPI, which is the cart abandonment rate, and that happens when you have sort of a rusty payment structure and the user experience is not good. So we mainly focused on the user experience for the payment gateway, and that really made a big difference. Next question is, once the COVID-19 situation is over, how those retailers are expected to respond who have not yet entered the e-commerce market, especially when this situation is badly impacting many brick and mortar retailers. Right. So if you've seen the presentation earlier, I spoke about the brick and mortar retailers already getting into the e-commerce. They're already making a foray into e-commerce. A case in point, let's say the biggest brick and mortar retailer in the Middle East is Carrefour. So Carrefour, while they have a Carrefour.com, they also have a Carrefour Now. So they already are ramping up their e-commerce infrastructure to service this kind of virtual demand that has been created by the COVID-19. And they're going to further ramp this service up because I think we are all in for a long haul. And this particular virus is going to remain for a while, I would say for at least next quarter. So we're going to see a ramping up of the last mile facilities with the brick and mortar stores like Carrefour, Lulu, and others in the region. And the ones who have not entered it, obviously it's a bit late. They have to probably look at a long-term strategy, and they have to probably look at setting up e-commerce presence for the next fiscal year, because it takes a good 6 to 9 months to set up a really good online setup with a great experience. And with the big boys like Carrefour and Lulu already playing the game very well, the entry barrier is pretty high for a new brick and mortar retailer to come in. So that's my perspective. Next question is, for anyone starting a business using e-commerce, would you recommend to use online giants such as Noon, Amazon Prime, etc., or focus more on creating your own identity and website? Very good question. So the point is, for a company or for startups, you can either sell your products online or you can create your own first-party e-commerce, venture. The only issue with the first-party venture is the fact that it needs a significant amount of investment to bring the traffic to your own e-commerce site, especially when you have big boys like Amazon and Moon are present who have billions of dollars of funds to actually bring in the traffic. That said, if you have a special product, it obviously makes sense. For example, I give you a case in point. In Middle East, we have got mumsworld.com. So we have got a very specialized vertical portal that caters to mothers, who have children between, 0 to 12 years old. And they particularly, they basically, their punchline is they put the mother first. So all the things that a mother needs for a very young child to a pre-teenage child are provided by mumsworld.com. So it's a vertical site with a very strong proposition. So if you have such a strong proposition that differentiates you from the players in the competitive landscape, then obviously it makes sense to make an investment to move into an e-commerce foray. Another example could be sellingcar.com. So as you know, Dubizzle, we were selling our cars in Dubizzle earlier in Dubai, but that has got a little defocused because they're selling everything. But Sell Any Car is bringing in that focus, or buyanycar.com. So if you have that kind of a very unadulterated, strong differentiation, then it makes sense to create your first party website for e-commerce, and it will also require a significant amount of funding to bring in the traffic, to promote your site. So that's the only caveat. Next question, for anyone starting a business using e-commerce, I've answered that. If someone doesn't have experience in retail, given chance to change the industry, what would be your advice? Right. So, well, like any other domain, every retail, expects that you have some kind of experience in retail. But you can start with a startup position, though I'm not an expert in human resource or job in terms of somebody who's changing from oil and gas to retail. But I can only say that you can have an entry-level job, and then you can work towards getting more experience in the retail domain, and then move up the ladder. What is the share of top players, Amazon and Noon, in MENA? Right. I do not have this particular data right now. I wanted to have it, but I don't have this data, so I don't give you wrong information. One thing that I can tell you is that the MENA market is fairly fragmented. What I mean to say by that is that if you go to China and the US, the top two players have 60% plus market share. Yeah. Whereas in MENA, the last that I know, that Amazon and Noon are about 30%, 30 to 40% or so. So the market is still fragmented, and the battle is between the local pure players like Amazon and Noon, and with a lot of cross-border players, as I mentioned, like Jolly Chick, like AliExpress, like eBay, and so on. So the market is very, very fragmented, but in time to come, it's going to consolidate. That's my point of view. Given this particular year, with this kind of downturn and the demand falling, I see that there's going to be a lot of consolidation, and we may not see that many players. And especially with the local players addressing the demand and supply imbalance issues, I feel that the top two players are going to be at least 50%. market share in the Middle East like other regions? Right, great question. How a PMP certified professional can apply in project manager role in e-commerce from telecom background? Is it logically possible? Yes, it's possible because the tools and techniques of project management essentially remains the same. Whether you are, because it's not domain specific, right? So a project manager essentially can switch domains. This is the advantage of project management. So what I'm going to do, and I mentioned, if you write to me through PMI, I can send you a cheat sheet in terms of the key skills, the key experience that are required to be, a project manager in e-commerce domain. So I can do that. I can help you with a PDF with the key skills that are required to make this switch if you're thinking of. What are the challenges for B2B e-commerce in MENA? Great question. MENA is not that industrialized, right? So B2B e-commerce is very popular in highly industrialized countries like US, in China, I would say within India and Southeast Asia, where there's a strong industrial business. Over here, the only industrial business that drives GDP is the oil and gas, and that is not really linked much to e-commerce as such. So as the industrial business gets more mature in the region, and as more manufacturing companies come on board, the B2B commerce will gain prominence. But as of now, it has started. We see one or two players who are offering B2B e-commerce services, but I would say it will take a few years, especially with the blip year 2020 with the COVID-19. I would say, let's give it a couple of years till 2022. When we'll see the B2B e-commerce coming in, because I see it as a clear trend, because B2C has already come in very strongly. So B2B is going to follow suit. So it's going to happen. It's only a matter of time. Right. We're heading towards the end of the session. So if you have any other questions, we can take one or two. Otherwise, it's great speaking to you. Thanks for your time. I hope you enjoyed the session as much as I did presenting it to you. So we can stay in touch. And if you want to link up with me, you can link up with me on LinkedIn, and we can have a conversation. Thank you. I don't think there are any more questions. So we call it today. Thank you very much. Stay safe. And good night.